All right, great, everybody. Um, Happy to have you back and to introduce Alexander, who's here from the Open Search Foundation, and he will introduce the need for an open web search in Europe and the approach of the Open Search Foundation and its implication for e-commerce companies to us. So thanks a lot for being with us, Alexander,
Thank
and
you,
the
Paul.
stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, to start with, I just want to warn you, I'm not a techie guy. I was listening to you the last 20 minutes and I only understood half of it, what you said. So I'm more the strategic and marketing guy within the Open Search Foundation. And this presentation is more about food for thought, I thought, and maybe a place to discuss implications for e-commerce companies. And so let's see what this whole thing is about. And I'm going to start with a rather stupid question, which is not really addressed to you, but it's a nice little question I'm always asking some companies. Do you use Google? What a question. Don't get me wrong if I'm asking that question, because first I want to start with a plea for search engine, because this is not going to be about search engine bashing or Google bashing, maybe a bit. But search engines are great. They help us to discover the world and to understand the world. Search engines are wonderful. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, right? And 98% of the people out there start their journey through the web via a search engine. And this is interesting, in addition, to know that in 93% of the cases, it's Google that we use in Europe. So this field really controls our life. So now coming back to this maybe stupid question, they asking, do you use Google? So especially within the last 1.5 years during the pandemic, I had several talks with companies due to several things. And I was just suggesting, oh, let's do a Zoom meeting. And the reaction of those companies very often was, no, Zoom, we cannot use Zoom because of all the data protection issues. And then I was asking the question, do you use Google? And in addition, the question that I was asking was also at work. So that's, these questions led to a lack of understanding at the companies, because many people don't understand that there's the connection between Google and the data protection problem, but the connection is quite simple. So if you're worried about, if a company is worried about its company's data, it should rather do without Google, or at least be a bit more cautious. What do I mean? Well, Google has a data monopoly with 93% market share in Germany. It is a data monopoly. There's virtually no other big search engine over there. It is the largest data collector in the world. And following parts of the presentations yesterday, I think of Lucien and Roman, for example, I see that you work a lot around with Google, and it doesn't sound that you're always absolutely fine with the things that happen. Now, coming back to those companies, when employees use Google at work, they are primarily looking for information that relates to the work, which is quite obvious. So this ranges from simple searches about the next train connection, but also within the research departments, they Google in search for information for the innovations and whatsoever. So with this behavior, companies provide a tech giant with very, very valuable information, such as what they are currently researching for, and this free of charge. And that's why I'm asking the companies, I took Zoom as one example because it's a very famous example these days. If they talk about data protection and the protection of data of companies, I'm asking this question, do you use Google at work? Because Google reads along the things you do. So now you might say, oh my gosh, is this guy a conspiracy theorist? I would say no, because I have some facts with me that I want to share with you. And let me start first with some information we already had. but just to pick it up step by step. Particularly if we look at Europe, why is there de facto only one search engine? So number one, worldwide, there are only 4 relevant search engines with their own search index. This is going to be very important to make a differentiation between search index and search engine. I will come back to that later on because this is one of the very important parts of our approach. So out of these 4, there are only 2 search indices that are really significant. So the one is Google, obviously, and the other one is in the Eastern world, Baidu from China. The other 2 that I want to mention here is Yandex of Russia, and if you want to name it as relevant, Bing in the United States, maybe Saper in Korea, okay. But if we go further into details for Europe, at least there's just one search engine of relevance, and this is Google. And as I just mentioned, they have 93% market share. So it's a search engine monopoly. And everybody who has to do with economics knows a monopoly is never the best thing to do. If we say with 93% market share, Google hardly leaves room for others. There are a few alternatives, such as, for example, Ecosia or Startpage, but they are not really independent, but mostly they access Google search index. Ecosia is using a Bing search index, but under strict regulations. So the question really is this a real alternative? In addition, there are some other aspects that are at least critical. Search indexes and search algorithms of the search engines are more secret, I think, than the Coca-Cola formula. You, as the techie guys, might say, no, not that much. We know a lot, but you tried a lot and you try to figure out things. But most people don't really know how the search results are determined, how the sorting and weighting is done according to which kind of criteria, to which we virtually have no influence. So that's one thing. And another thing is that search engines are not neutral. They give us only a limited access to the existing data. I remember a chart that Roman showed yesterday. It was a graph going like this, and I think it was like good search and bad search, something like that. We said only a few really got found in the searches, and a lot in the long tail got not found. And this is exactly what's happening. So search algorithms as a basis are made by people. We should not forget about that. And those people act either out of an economic, in terms of Google, or a governmental interest in terms of Baidu, right? So, but what we find, and this is not a number I made up, but I picked up from several other researchers. The result issues by Google lead to a limited access of information. 80% of all the clicks redirect to the same 10,000 domains, which is why Roman, I think, showed this nice graph that only a few get really the biggest part of the pie. And with over 360 million domains out there worldwide, this is less than 0.003%. So how come that this is the fact? For that, I found a nice quote, and the quote says, "For this type of reason and historical experience with other media, we expect that advertising-funded search engines will be inherently biased towards the advertisers and away from the needs of the consumers." So in terms of, oh gosh, another conspiracy theorist maybe, I'm asking you, do you know who said that? So I'm giving a quick answer to that. Maybe some of you know. It was these two guys. It was Larry Page and Sergey Brin who said this nice little sentence. They admitted that advertising-funded search engines are inherently biased towards the advertisers. Yeah, so I did not make that up. The Google founders know that, and they know the business very well. So there's another nice quote that is important in this area to understand all the things of the background. for the approach of the Open Search Foundation. The quote, if it doesn't cost anything, you're the product. So at first glance, the major search engines are all free, but they make the living by collecting our data, merging it, well, often even across multiple services and platforms, as Google does with YouTube and all the range of different services. They evaluate it, they process it. So in the end, we pay with our data. So we are not the customers of the search engine, but the product. And the fun thing around that is, or the critical thing around that is, I call it a perpetuum mobile, because this is a system inherent. A search engine or the market of search engine very often ends up in a network monopoly. The value of a network increases over proportionally with every new user. So maybe in the beginning we have a set of different search engines in this case, and we had so. And then over and over, people go to one party, to one product, and use it more and more and more. And the results this company, in this case Google, is getting, the results are getting better and better with every single search request we do. We feed the system. And as a consequence, my question is Google the best search engine on the market? Yes, I think definitely yes, it is so. So there is a good reason why people use Google, and I use Google too, besides other search engines as well. But the question is, do we really want to carry on and feed the system, and only this one system? So other search engines doesn't deliver such great results because we don't use them. And unfortunately, we know that after a service was free, it could happen that a company like Google changes the scenery. So I just talking about a thing recently happened with Google Pictures, a service that was free of charge, and now they changed that. So the more power there is, the more such a network monopoly can rule the whole market. And here I've got another interesting quote. It's from a book called Machtmaschinen. It's a bestseller in Germany. It's called, translated, Power Machines, Why Data Monopolies Are a Threat to Our Future. And Ramge and Meyer-Schönfelder, they came up in the beginning to explain the whole problem behind that. Two things, particularly with regard to the economic problem. In economic terms, data monopolies lead to increasing inequality of opportunity. Power asymmetries intensify. Yeah, if there's a company that controls 93% of the market, you can easily understand that. But the result is critical. The innovative capacity, that's what they write, of all other companies as well as society as whole declines. And this is perfectly described by those two authors on the example of autonomous driving. And they say, Google's having so much data that nobody else can collect that much data, that Google will always be ahead of time. So as a consequence, we say, there's need to do something against that, which is not, as I say, doing something against Google, but doing something in terms of more diversity, getting back autonomy. And this is the part where the Open Search Foundation comes in. We saw that within the pandemic that Europe in parts, and not only in digitalization, was too dependent on other countries. So we outsourced things to Asia and United States, and then we had no mask, we had no mats, stuff like that. And with regard to digitalization, we're completely dependent on the United States. So Europe needs to do something here, and particularly with regard to the internet search, which is often left behind in these discussions. The Open Search Foundation was founded to work on concepts, to work for cooperative, open, and distributed internet search. So we are a non-profit initiative working on such concepts, and the big question is, can we do things just as Google did them? And the easy answer to that is obviously no. Again, I take a quote just to get me out of this conspiracy thing and saying maybe there's a lot of other conspiracies, but I don't think so. Ian de Vries held a brilliant speech on the second International Symposium on Open Search last October. And there was a great sentence. He said, "We can never beat them," talking about Google, "at what they do very well if we try to do the same." So absolutely, I completely agree. That means when we talk about open search, we need to have an approach that differs from the existing models, or even that differs from the failed models. There are several alternative search engines that failed. Why did they fail? And what do we do? What do we have to do differently? And the first thing we suggest, and that brings me back to the aspect I was mentioning before with the search engines and search indexes, is the following. The basic idea of our approach is based on the separation of the search index as the basis for all other further services and the search engines. So one goal is to first create the condition for an open search index. An important principle in here is that the internet search should serve the people and not the other way around. That's what I meant with if it doesn't cost anything, you're the product. So we cannot use the same mechanisms in this area as they were used before. Let me just explain you the difference, why we are focusing so much on the search index and what is in here for you as e-commerce companies or people who do search in e-commerce. So the open search ecosystem shall work like this. Very simply put, there is all the information available in the internet. The idea is that we have open search internet crawlers. They gather information and systemize it in a web depository, in an open web index database. And this is not of any difference to Google. So the open search internet crawlers would do just the same. They set up an open search web index, and to further work with this index, there's also an interface. So, and this is where our technical concept more or less stops. We are focused on bringing in ideas and as a catalysator to get such an open search web index. But then the interesting part, and I think also for you out there at the MICES conference, is that now there's the chance it's an open web index that a lot of services can dock onto these this open search web index. This is something which cannot be done today with a system like Google. We cannot get hold on to the data that Google has. It's their property. So we cannot do that in the same manner. Now, the idea would be to set up these services, and then users could use a variety of different services. I think, yes, there will be some kind of major general search engine. A guy from Ecosia on the Open Search Symposium last year said, yeah, it could be a great idea if something like this would exist, then Ecosia could use that instead of Bing's index. So the idea is to create an open, transparent index based on humanistic values. What does that mean? Oh, wow. So one thing is that a lot of people say we are far behind in Europe with regard to digitalization, which is unfortunately true. But there's one good thing about that in my point of view, and it is the fact that we can learn from things that went wrong or are not perfect. And now we can try to set up a search infrastructure which is not closed, which is not a black box, which is then the web index, a free and public good, which looks at data privacy and protect data, which is neutral and trustworthy and not commercial driven, and which is open for the future. And since you are more techie, this is the techiest part in here of my presentation. I'm just showing you 3 basic principles to develop such an ecosystem. And I'm going into more details about the first one, collaborative distributed computing and hosting. The other one are very easy to understand, since we want to have an open and transparent open web index. It must be open source, and here the role model obviously is Linux. We need to set up something like Linux, particularly looking at the specialties and particularities of the search infrastructures, yes. And it needs public moderation, just like with Wikipedia. Not everybody can do that, that's quite obvious, but with regard to the search algorithms, how data is indexed, how it is stored, what kind of data is indexed, a lot of question arises about where to draw the border between, do we index racist content or not? And a lot of open questions arise and need to be answered, I know, but it's about the approach we are following, and we're talking with a lot of companies and politicians and stuff like that. I will come back to that as well. But let me have a look, deeper look at this collaborative distributed computing and hosting, because a lot of people say, okay, do you want to build up big server farms like Google has? And we say no, because there's one technical idea, and this idea is in contrast to the previous approaches. We see the necessity that the topic must be a joint task. It cannot be one company. It is not the Open Search Foundation who will build such a web index. It must be a joint system. Maybe it's another foundation run by the European Union or whoever that needs to be decided. But the idea is that, for example, in the technical era, we are relying on something we call a federation of data centers. So the idea is these data centers make their free capacity available to jointly index the internet. And this is the so-called distributed crawling and indexing. So if you look at this map, you see main hubs and sub-hubs. So a main hub in France, a main hub in Germany, in Italy. So those main hubs have sub-hubs, and those data centers, they index the IT domains, the France domains, the German domains, and then we put them together in one depository. And this then is cost and resource saving, because we use the existing capacities much better. And we don't need to set up such big new server farms. And this is, I think, very important. Another thing from an economic point of view is the following. As I just mentioned, we've got this this open web index as the basis for everything else. Yeah, there might be some kind of open web search, general open web search, but a lot of other services can dock on it, like mobile services, geospatial services, and I think also e-commerce could use it. The idea is not new. It's just like Galileo program for satellite was using it, the joint task working together. We say this could be some kind of Europe's Galileo program for internet autonomy in Europe. And to explain it a bit more in detail, I think this is one of the greatest advantages of such an open search index from an economic point of view, because companies can just, for example, set up their own internal search engine on this index, which accesses the entire internet and not just a fraction. And thus, the search engine would deliver much more relevant results to the company. And at the same time, the search can be set up in such a way that others do not read along, because I can have it as a closed system for this particular search, for example. In this way, data protection and compliance guidance or guidelines can be achieved easier, and the company's own innovation approaches can be better protected. That's the idea. And due to the fact that we talk a lot with other people, we got a lot of feedback and saying, yeah, that seems to be a good approach. We've got some visions. Yeah, and now you might start to love. Within 5 years' time, we have different things that we want to achieve, addressing different topics. Some of them are being technical topics, some of them more other topics. So the first one is more in the direction of creating more diversity. So you see, we want that alternative search engines in Europe make out a 10% market share, taking away 10% from Google. So it doesn't mean Google will not exist. I think this is this will not be true, but taking away 10% would be already a big success. We think we need to increase the attention and awareness about data monopolies. So we think about, we want to teach children, we want to teach the people. We have a working group which is called Awareness, and we want to get these things into the schools, into search units, in the teaching plans. We want to build such a web index with European ethical values and standards. There's a particular program starting right now. We want to have that in compliance with European law and democracy. And as I just mentioned, this shall not be a commercial system. This shall be a sustainable business model committed to the common good. Well, yeah. A person with a new idea is crank until the idea succeeds. I see there are already 10 remarks in the chat. I haven't seen what the remarks or questions are all about, but in this respect, no, I don't think I'm a conspiracy theorist. Maybe I'm a nutcase. Okay, let's see that. But it's really nice to see how many others have already recognized the necessity to go into such a direction. Right at the front, for example, the European Union has us on the agenda for this big Horizon Europe program. Many digital ones also agree with us. And in this sense, my answer to the question that a lot of people saying, why now? Why do you think your approach will be better or will succeed? My answer is number one, because I think it must be the power of the crowd, a lot of people working, an institution working together. And I think the time is right now, which it was not 10 years ago. And because we believe in these things, we try to increase the awareness and we try to get input. There are a lot of unanswered questions right now. And this leads me to the one final thing, having a look at the different partners that are already on track with us. You see here, we work together with CERN, with the Leibniz supercomputing, with the ESA, MetaGear, YASI, Common Crawl, SpaceNet, a lot of universities that work together with us on the concepts. There are experiments that show that the distributed computing and hosting is working. That from a technical point of view, that this is not a big challenge. And yeah, that we say the whole thing is a joint task together for a better net. That's what we are aiming for. And to end up with, I think it's now, it's your turn. I think there are already some questions, but I'm also interested in the question, what would be the prerequisites for you as the ecom freaks you would have for such an index, or what could be the biggest achievements for you? That's it from my point, and I'm very curious to see your questions and yeah, your remarks.
Well, thanks a lot, Alexander, for this very forward thinking that you presented. We got a couple of remarks in the chat so far. I start with Lucien, and maybe you can comment on that. He thinks Google is less and less relevant as more and more information lives elsewhere, like in LinkedIn, Discord, Slack, Intranet, etc. What is your thought on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy if it was already that far. I think if I'm looking at this target group, I think for sure you're much more advanced than 99% of the other people out there, and you know how to deal with the things. As I mentioned, I only understood half of the things you were talking through. I was saying, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm not the technical guy, yeah. you know how to work around and do replacements and whatever you were talking about that. But in general, so if we talk with people that are working in this area, you usually don't need to convince them that much. But in the end, in Europe, it's still 93% market share of Google. Although it's declining, it was already, it has been 95% 2 years ago. So there's a small decline. And I think from an economic point of view, going away from such a monopoly, with the help of people like the guys here at this conference, then Google might be less relevant. And even I can say I need to watch maybe the different presentations again that you recorded in order to understand more and make a connection to our technical guys. I'm just the trigger guy in order to make maybe the network connections to others that can really talk on the same technical level that I cannot do. But I think, yeah, out there's a lot of possibilities. And it's not against, or it's not for only one solution. We think we need to work together. So Yassi and Common Crawl, they are not competitors. We see, or MetaGear. MetaGear, for example, is a partner from the first moment on. Wolfgang and Sander Beuermann is a founding member of the Open Search Foundation, for example.
Great that you highlighted the connection. I'm flipping through the chat and seeing a lot of participants having ideas to connect as well. Like Angel highlighted the role of USearch, and Vincent is interested in the technical fundament and the architectural blueprint. And there's also questions to the business model for such a search engine. So very broad questions. So I want to remind you that we have a spatial chat social gathering session after the block of talks. So maybe it's cool to connect there as well regarding those kinds of questions and comments. And again, I would like to thank you very much, Alexander, for this inspiring talk and the perspective you've given to us.